report on international business transactions. Over the next several segments, we'll be taking you through the basics of how international business transactions, also known as IBTs, work. We'll look at how they operate on a daily basis and how the current legal system works to facilitate those transactions. In order to help you understand the specifics of how these complex IBTs work, we'll look at an actual business transaction in action. Let's begin by introducing the parties. This is Bretta Baya, a young entrepreneur living in Honolulu, Hawaii. One day, after a particularly epic surf session at Kewalo's, Bretta Baya hit on a great idea, selling fair trade organic surf wax. Let's turn to Mr. Baya now and see what he has to say about his new business.
I was surfing out at Kewalo's. It was a nice summer swell, 4 to 6 feet, and as I was paddling out, I realized I needed more wax. I was thinking to myself, and you know what I've never seen? Organic surf wax. So, going off of what I've already started, a small surf business, I thought, what if I started an organic sex wax business? And that's kind of where this all began.
What a great idea, Mr. Baya. We are happy to report that after a prolonged internet search, Mr. Baya was able to find a seller of fair trade organic wax in Timbuktu, Africa. Sister Mary Seller has been making organic wax in the traditional Catholic way for the past 54 years. Let's turn to Sister Mary Seller and learn more about her business.
What we do is take a whole bunch of bees and stick them in a box and sing hymnals to them until they start making wax. We harvest the wax with large blessed sticks, and then we press the wax into bars that we sell on the international market.
Thanks, Sister Mary Seller. Well, it looks like we have our parties and an end goal, getting the surf wax from Timbuktu, Africa to Honolulu, Hawaii. But how exactly can these two parties arrange a successful business transaction? Is it as simple as Sister Mary Seller shipping some wax over to Honolulu, Hawaii, and Mr. Baya sending her a check? Let's see what the parties have to say.
It's not that I don't trust the people in Timbuktu, but I want to guarantee that I get my handshake even if it doesn't look like it used to. My biggest support came from my cousin Kimura, or Kimo for short. She's actually a recent graduate from the William S. Richardson School of Law, and she was telling me that she took a class called International Business Transactions there, so she actually volunteered to help me out with this. She was telling me that she learned in this class that these days there are mechanisms available for buyers and clients who haven't actually met each other in person. In the old days, people knew each other so they could make deals based on a handshake. And since today's world's a little bit more complex, she was explaining to me that these mechanisms enable people who don't know each other to make virtual handshakes, if you will.
Look, we fully believe in the goodness of man and all that stuff, but business is business. I gotta make sure the money's good and that the holy wax transaction is protected throughout.
So, can Mr. Baya and Sister Seller pull this transaction off, given some of their reservations? Well, we know that complex international business transactions happen every day as goods move from place to place, with most of us never even questioning the process and systems in place. To help us gain some insight into the particular legal mechanisms that facilitate IBTs, let's turn to our special legal correspondent, Mr. Legalese, an expert in international business law. Mr. Legalese, we know that some type of commercial law is going to apply to Mr. Baya and Sister Seller's transactions, but what law are we dealing with here?
Well, Nancy, I am glad you asked me that question. And first of all, I'd like to thank you all for having me on the show. I'm sure I will be able to explain to your viewers what exactly we're dealing with here, legally speaking. So, first, we have to distinguish between public international law and private international law. Now, these are two separate fields of law, understand. Public international law governs how nations deal with each other, while private international law concerns the individual disputes between parties and refers to the use of domestic law, a conflict of laws, if you will.
So what exactly does that mean? Are Mr. Baya and Sister Seller supposed to rely on public international law or private international law? I'm sure some of our viewers would be grateful if you could take us through our parties' transaction and explain how public and/or private international law would apply.
Of course, be happy to. Actually, Mr. Baya and Sister Seller will be dealing with both public and private international law. For example, the UN Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods, or the CISG as we call it, is a great example of public international law, and the parties could have chosen to have the CISG govern their contract. The CISG, it's a treaty that acts as a body of international law assembled by a number of different nations. Now, private international law can be more clearly understood as rules that govern a conflict of law situation. That is to say, in an international transaction where controlling public law is silent, or the parties have not specifically chosen a governing law, the rules of private international law will determine what laws should apply to the contract.
Ah, I see. Okay. So if Mr. Buyer and Sister Seller decided to move forward with their sales transaction, they could draft a sales contract which specifically incorporated the CISG as governing law. Thanks for helping us get a handle on that, Mr. Legalese. And this brings me to a general concern myself and the viewers might have as well. What tools do international parties have to decide how and which law should govern their transactions? I mean, I don't like conflict, and I'm sure Mr. Buyer and Sister Seller would like to avoid any and all conflict. So what are their choices?
Well, there are a variety of legal instruments available, ranging from treaties to uniform laws to model contracts, and without getting into too many specifics because there really are a lot of options here. Now, what I'd like to do is to show our viewers this list of 9 sources of law for international business transactions. Now, the most important thing about this list is that the first 4 sources have the force of law. Basically, this means that their application to a contract is automatic. For example, say that a country is ratified and is a party to the CISG. The CISG is a multilateral treaty, and when a country is a party to that treaty, its citizens will automatically be subject to its rules. But the remaining points on this list do not have the force of law. That means the sources of law, whether it's a restatement or a model code, such as the Uniform Commercial Code, will only apply to the transaction if the parties specifically agree to put it in their contract.
So, what you are saying is that if Mr. Buyer wanted the Uniform Commercial Code as articulated in the Hawaii Revised Statutes to apply to his transaction with Sister Seller, their contract would have to specifically state that the Commercial Code of Hawaii applied.
Exactamundo! And let me just add that this contract language, any contract language, is actually very important. Buyer and Sister Seller write their contract, right? And what law they choose to incorporate will determine what happens should any problems arise. Now, keep in mind that people are buying and selling goods and services all over the world. Sometimes, people draft their own sales contracts and without the help of a lawyer. So, at the end of the day, they could end up with a less than great contract. But the parties never know. They might never know they have this weak contract because they never run into any problems. But any IBT lawyer worth their weight will know that problems can happen, and they get paid to write contracts that are clear and precise as to what happens should things go wrong. That way, when problems do occur, the courts will have a strong understanding of what laws to apply and be able to resolve issues more efficiently.
Thanks, Mr. Legalese. Great advice, as always. Well, that brings us to the end of this segment. We hope you now understand a bit more about the legal framework behind international business transactions. Join us next time as we delve further into Mr. Buyer and Sister Seller's transaction and look at some archetypical sales transactions in order to help our parties decide how to move forward with getting their organic fair trade surf wax from Timbuktu to Honolulu. Thank you.